All happened a few years ago. I was in New York right when Hurricane Sandy hit the area. On the 26th of October, the New York governor declared a statewide state of emergency. Panic buying had spread with the speed of light, and New Yorkers were now fighting to get the last loaves of bread and bottles of water, including my brother. You see, my brother and I lived in two completely different worlds. He was adopted when he was only 3 years old by a very kind family from New York. Me, on the other hand, I wasn't as lucky. When we finally met 26 years later, we were both blooming young men living a good life, but with completely different backgrounds. That's why when Hurricane Sandy was about to hit New York, I rushed on the first plane there to help out my brother and his family. His naive trust in the government was beyond all imagination. He was convinced that an entire army would be at his disposal of New Yorkers all throughout the disaster. On the other hand, my expectations of governmental help were the lowest of the lowest. And still, somehow, they managed to go way below that, in the most ignorant and ruthless way I've ever seen in my life. For one entire week after the hurricane, FEMA was nowhere to be seen. Now, I don't know if you've ever been through a hurricane, but here's the thing no one ever tells you. The disaster itself is nothing compared to what comes next. During the whole thing, you're so filled with adrenaline, you barely realize what's happening. The roof above your head sounds like it's about to crush to pieces. You see water creeping in your home through every single crack, and you can almost feel the walls wobbling around you. Everything is so overwhelming, you barely have the time to take it all in. But the moment you take your first deep breath and hug your loved ones with tears of relief in your eyes, well, that's when the nightmare gets real. First, I hear the screams. I remember running down the street with water clutching at my ankles, trying to figure out what's going on. The whole neighborhood was sunk in pitch dark, and I could barely see the faces around me. There were many injured and a few kids separated from their parents. I don't know how long I stayed there, helping out any way I could, but by the time I was back with my family, my feet, hands, and jaw were violently blue with cold and so stiff I couldn't move a nerve. It was freezing outside, and people had no source of heat, no power, no running water, and nowhere to go. They were waiting for FEMA. The hurricane, announced over a week before, took the $1 billion agency by surprise. Meanwhile, after 3 days, our stockpile reached the critical level we all feared. We only had enough for the 4 of us, my brother, his wife, his baby daughter, and myself. My brother and I had to take turns sleeping. People got angry about a day, and we were afraid for our lives. I can't even describe what it's like to see a mother fear for her daughter's life to the verge of breakdown. It's heartbreaking. So when I heard that one of our neighbor's baby was burning with fever and screaming with pain, I decided to go lend a helping hand. The only problem was getting out of the house and returning unharmed. Down the street, the rioting had started, as people were sick and tired of waiting for FEMA. In a desperate attempt to attract the attention of authorities, they smashed a car and set it on fire in the middle of the street. I used everything on my way to hide from them: cars, houses, bushes. I was ready to crawl like a snake if I needed, just to get back to my family safe and sound. As I was walking in slow motion and holding my breath, pushing myself to the limit of silence, suddenly I hear this tiny little voice. "Uncle Davy, wait, you forgot these." In that very moment, my heart froze. It was my baby niece, running in her pajamas, holding a life straw and a lighter in her hands. She must have heard us talking around the house about how our survival supplies saved our lives, and she just grabbed them from my bug-out bag. I was looking at her running when I heard a loud, deep yell behind me. 6 desperate people were looking at the same little girl. Their eyes had nothing human in them. They were like rabid dogs. That moment, I knew there was only one thing I could do. I grabbed my niece, and I started running with her as fast as I could. I didn't know where I was going. I was driven only by the screams of the ones who chased me, and the screams kept getting closer and closer with every single step I took. I had no idea how long I ran with my niece crying in my arms. Only when I saw the old warehouse with its rusty door cracked open, I remembered taking the first breath in ages. I rushed to the door and slammed it shut behind me. The door creaked and cracked open again. There was no lock, no key, nothing. I could hear the screams outside louder than ever, and in a boost of pure terror, I put my niece down and I searched my pockets. I always carried a small cord with me, just in case. I took it out, with my hands shaking like I was electrocuted. I quickly tied the 2 doorknobs together. Sure, it wasn't a deadbolt, but I could save us a good couple of minutes, which was more than enough for me and my niece to lose our tracks. We used the back door to flee the scene, and then hid behind a bush until we saw our chasers run right by us. It took FEMA 7 days to make us the honor of showing up after Sandy turned our streets into a ghost town. And even then, that's pretty much all they did. They showed up, put up a tent, and waited. They didn't even check to see if there were any people in need of medical care. They just sat there, expecting people to go up to them. As President Reagan once said, the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government," and I'm here to help. I never relied on the government, and never will. I saved my family's life with nothing more than a useless $1 item I had in my pocket. And all that time, when people were unprepared, hungry, cold, and sick, my father had food, water, and power 24/7. That was a lesson that completely changed my life, and I wanted to share it with you. It doesn't happen every day that a dozen looters attack you and try to take your most precious thing away from you. Unfortunately, it happens more than you'd like to imagine. It happened during Hurricane Katrina, then during Hurricane Sandy, and is probably going to keep happening every time a disaster or crisis hits the U.S. But here's a secret most survivalists don't know. The kind of survival I had to learn in that life and death situation is universal. It doesn't matter if you're dealing with a hurricane, a civil war, or a looter attack. This type of survival that I want to show you, in my opinion, the only kind that actually prepares you for the real deal, doesn't need any recipes. It doesn't require any fancy survival gear you barely know how to use. And it sure as hell doesn't require thousands of dollars, like so many so-called survivalists claim nowadays. Survival is basic, it's dirt cheap, and it can be dead simple too, if you know how to prep to the teeth.